down.
Woo! What?
Hopefully we'll start to see some comments popping in here. It's not saying that we're live on my YouTube, at least not yet. So,
Oh my
yep,
gosh.
there we go. There we go. Oh,
Hi.
gotta mute myself. Almost forgot. That was almost a disaster. Hello, everyone. Welcome. I know it's early for us here in the States, but I know that I have a sizable audience over in Europe that's always clamoring for a time spot they can attend. So it's morning for us here on the West Coast, 10 a.m., but it's gonna be probably like 6 p.m., 7 in Europe, depending on where you're at. So thanks everyone. Oh, I was looking at the private chat. I was like, I don't see any comments yet, but there they are. They're coming in. Hi everyone. Can't wait for this one. I desperately want an open minded woman that I can explore my sexuality with. For some reason, that has been extremely hard to find, but we can definitely get into talking about partners. Yes, surprise live stream. This is one of our field forums. So, myself and Erin, who I have worked with before, another one of these, we are going to be going over some questions for about an hour. So, if you all have watched my live streams before, the usual deal I like to tell people is to ask your questions early. That's the best way to make sure we can get to them. But we can just chit chat about, what is going on and what you'll have questions about. We want to focus on more that intro side of kink today, but we'll kind of see where the questions end up leading us. So I would love to know what is on y'all's mind as we're coming in. We got at least one person here from Dublin. So I see the time zone is working for the Europeans after all. And
Yay.
of California, Kentucky. I always am very curious to hear where people are from. So thank you for sharing that. So
Yes.
I guess I will just go ahead and get maybe started with some intros for people who don't know us. So I am Evie Lupine. I have been an educator on YouTube about kink, dating, sexuality, etc. for 8 or 9 years now at this point. It started as a hobby, became a job later on down the line, but it's been a really enjoyable journey. And I love breaking down very niche kinks and shining a spotlight on some of the underserved areas of the kink world and sexuality, and just like breaking down stigmas and barriers around things like, oh, well, I'm that kind of person, so I can't do this, or only people like that do that activity, and so it's not for me. And I really love talking about like the discovery and the authenticity process of kink. But for people who don't know you, Erin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes. And Evie, I really love that intro for yourself. I feel like we're in alignment in those ways. Like whatever you think kink is or what you think you are, like open your mind a little, because there's a whole world of interesting kinks and things to explore that you might not have considered. So I am Erin Tillman, she, her pronouns. I am a certified sex educator and a certified intimacy coordinator. So I help coordinate sex scenes in TV and film. I've been in the realm of relationships, intimacy, consent, boundaries, kink, non-monogamy professionally for about 10 years, 10, 12 years, something around that. Yeah, so Evie and I have been like adjacent to each other for a very long time, and we just started doing these collabs lately. But yeah, I love this world so much, and I do focus a lot on newbies, and my goal is to always just be a safe space for people to have questions and explore things that they might not have considered. I grew up in a small town in Ohio here in the States, and I know what it's like to feel a little different and not really know where to go. So,
Yeah.
yay, hi.
Yeah, I feel like that's a very relatable experience for a lot of people, that growing up in a small town, not necessarily always having a safe place to be able to be who you really are, or to find people that will get along with you in that same way. And I may be wearing a religion makes me gag t-shirt, but that's mostly because I was raised Catholic, and I feel like there is a correlation
Always,
between being
yes,
raised Catholic and
yes,
discovering kink later in life. I don't know.
yes, correct,
Mhm.
yes.
So we got some people from Quebec. We got Kansas, Missouri, Kentucky, more LA. Got London. Love seeing. Okay, so go ahead. Question. Ton of time. We are also maybe going to be streaming to Instagram as well. We're trying to get that set up. So stand by for Instagram questions too. Andrew says, I got back on Field yesterday actually and have been sending out likes. Got a small date tonight after work, so this topic is great timing. Well, congratulations, Andrew. I am glad to hear that Field is working out for you. I genuinely really do enjoy Field as a platform. I have recently been experimenting for the sake of making a video on the other like more mainstream dating apps, and Field is still like definitely top two for me. So I'm glad
Same.
that's working for you. I think we got a question here from Finn who says, hello from Pennsylvania. My one partner and I are both ace and super kinky. We want to get into some sexual kink, but want to make sure neither of us gets squicked out. Do you have any tips? So, as an asexual, I will take the lead on this question if you don't mind, Erin.
Please, yes.
I as an ace person, I think asexuality is such a big spectrum, right? So you all could be anywhere from like super ace, like never had a thought about somebody else's genitals in your life, all the way over to like more demi, or maybe somewhere in the middle, like me. I identify as gray A, which is sort of like between like asexual, like in the traditional sense that people think of it, and allosexual. Like I occasionally, very rarely experience something that would probably be called sexual attraction. And for me, being in the kink community actually really helped me be more comfortable with more body parts. Like before I was in the kink scene, and I was discovering that I was ace, I was really uncomfortable like seeing naked people, or like knowing how to process body parts in a neutral way, because I wasn't really raised in a family where like nudity was normal. Like that wasn't part of our culture. And so when I got into the kink community, they gave me an opportunity to recontextualize things and stop seeing things as like sexual or scandalous. And that helped me be more comfortable interacting with them in what would typically be referred to as a more intimate scenario. And if you're trying to get into more sexual kink, I think having that comfort level with like body parts in general is really great. So just being out in the community and like seeing other people's bodies, I think is one, it's helpful for like body confidence in general, looking at other people and being like, wow, it is true that not everyone in real life looks like a supermodel. Like all these really normal, awesome bodies are having such an amazing, fun time. I can't have that too. And that is something I really enjoy. But I also do really enjoy the aspect of like just normalizing different body parts. And then like just very slowly going with like experimenting with boundaries. And Erin, you probably are familiar with this from your line of work, but I forget what the like actual term for it is, but there's a process you can go through that's talked about in a book called Hot and Unbothered. And it's a way of slowly introducing like intimacy over like a sustained period of time where you're just like touching without any kind of like intention of it being sexual, and like gradually increasing into more sexual areas without any intention to orgasm or have any particular results. It's just about that exploration and identifying those like comfortable and uncomfortable things, right? Like soft touch, firm touch, hair pulling, tickling, whatever types of sensation, body parts, giving, receiving, whatever combination that looks like. And just being able to, hey, go, I like this, I don't like this, let's do more of this, let's do less of that. And not have it be overwhelming in the way that maybe doing a more traditional BDSM scene might be. Because if you're doing BDSM and you're like, let's do some bondage and let's do some flogging, you're adding all this stuff in, and then it can be hard to identify afterwards like what was comfortable and what wasn't, and like what maybe tipped it over the edge into being really amazing or being not so good and something that you don't want to repeat. So I think just going slowly and having like a very open-minded process of like, we're just going to go very slowly and see what touch where feels good and not good. I understand as well as an ace person that kind of that like slow, like traditional romantic sexual intimacy can be kind of squicky, especially if you're used to being more sexual. So it doesn't have to be like soft caressing touches. If you know right off the bat that's not your thing, you can start with like, let's see if it's like entertaining or like funny to, I don't know why like tickling's on my head today, but like tickling somebody's feet, right? Like that's not really an intimate thing, but it can be something that like provokes a sexual response for some people, or maybe leads more in that direction. So yeah, just going slowly, really methodically testing things out. And then just like respecting your own boundaries and limits. Maybe looking at things like a yes, no, maybe checklist, watching other people's scenes, seeing what they do, and figuring out what feels most comfortable first, starting there, and then exploring outward. But Erin, I would love to hear your thoughts if you have any.
Yeah, no, you said so many great things. I mean, I think the one thing that stood out to me for sure is the normalization of seeing bodies. So much, and especially in American culture, we sexualize bodies, and bodies
Mm-hmm.
are bodies. They can be sexual, but they also can be bodies. And so I do feel like a lot of us do have a negative association with seeing naked bodies and certain genitals because there's been a sexualization or over sexualization of that. And sometimes a traumatic we've seen something traumatic or experience something traumatic around that. So yes, so to kind of work through shifting that into bodies or bodies. And this
Mm-hmm.
body that I might be touching or body I might be seeing at an event that might be naked is not necessarily sexual, and I don't have to interact with it. But yes, to have some kinky fun, especially at events, getting comfortable with bodies around are really important. And also, like you said, so many great things. The yes, no, maybe list is huge. So, my goal and my hope is that we all have partners that we feel comfortable communicating with. So if we do have those partners that we feel comfortable sharing like dreams and likes and dislikes, a yes, no, maybe list can be really helpful to see what kind of touch, what kind of impact toys we might want to use. You mentioned sensation play. Yes, yes, yes.
Mm-hmm.
I think the last time we did this, we both agreed that sometimes a lot of times our kinky play isn't sexual. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
there's an idea that people have that kink equals sex all the time. And it's like, no, it can be anything. It can be playful. It can be, it can be full teasing. It could be fully clothed, buttoned up all the time. And like, it can be so many different things. So yes, just explore and communicate as much as possible. And yes, you can totally be kinky and be ace and all the other things in the spectrum.
Yeah, and just maybe to put a bow on this question, I'll maybe give some specific examples of things to try. So, like, if you want to keep things covered, I think something like a spanking is something that you can easily do covered up that you can make more sexual. Like, you have this is the butt, right? Okay, and this is like the cleft of the butt cheeks down here. Hit kind of below that, right where the butt fold goes into the thigh. Hit for that sit spot. For a lot of people, they experience that as a form of sexual pleasure, especially if, I mean, actually, I don't spank enough people with prostates to know, but for people with for people with vulvas, it tends to be quite pleasurable to stimulate that sit spot area. So that can be something that can both be more traditional kink and can definitely get into more of a sexual type of flavored scene too. Or doing a spanking scene might have like a butt plug in, for example. If that's something you routinely do, you can just kind of add on maybe a little bit more of a sexual element. Or you could do a scene and like order your partner to touch themselves. So it's not where you're necessarily directly interacting sexually. I think that might be more comfortable for a lot of people because a lot of ace people do masturbate and they're familiar with how to touch themselves in a way that feels good. So there's just ways to play around with that depending on if you're looking more for like pain, power exchange, etc. But we don't have very much time, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next question, even though I'm sure I could make another like 10 minutes worth of suggestions out of that one. But Silly
Amazing.
Putty says, where can I find resources for non binary DOMs? Feels difficult to find kink specific resources for non binary folks, especially as dominant. So, Erin, do you have any suggestions for them?
I would say, depending on the location, one of our colleagues that comes to mind, she is not non-binary, but she does do a lot of events with a lot of LGBTQ rainbow folks, specifically
Mm-hmm.
non-binary and trans women. Justine Cross, I know she's been on
Yes.
this as well.
Mm-hmm.
She probably could have some resources around this. It is very tricky, and I just want to say this real fast. I mean, I'm in Los Angeles. Los Angeles is a massive city. It's the second largest city in the States. And yet it's just now in the last few years gotten more inclusive in these ways. And, it's a shame it's taken this long. But yes, there are a lot more resources and a lot more events. I'm more event focused in
Mm.
LA. So if you are in a city, definitely do a search for events that are more inclusive. But again, even here, it's like selected events in LA that I've seen. There's one called, oh my God, I'm going to look it up. It's like Tropic something in the Silver Lake area. And it is specifically a kinky, non-binary focused party. And I haven't been yet. And I don't know if it's my place to be there because I am a cis woman, but I've heard it's really great. So yes,
Mm.
that's my first answer.
Yeah, I know it's I see a lot of events that are like general LGBT centric, but not necessarily non-binary specific. I would say for an educator, I'd recommend looking into the first person who came to mind to me, and I put their name in the chat is Mix as an MX, Pucks Aplenty. And I actually think I interviewed them on my channel like a long time ago when they went by a different name. So I worked with them before briefly, and I know that they put on events that are like primarily catered to like AFAB and femme dominant people, but they are non-binary, and they do a lot of like education. I find a lot like the education for non-binary folk, it's strangely compared to what you might think, it's not as much online, but I see a lot of it in person of like non-binary people and trans people in general, like teaching and doing classes and discussion groups, but there's not necessarily like a how to dominate for non-binary people like class that I could recommend that's like a recorded class you could buy in like Gumroad or something. But I
Yeah.
do know that there's events. I always recommend looking for online events when you can, because that means like this, you can access education all the way around. And I will also say, if you're just looking to make connections, like Field is very inclusive as far as that is concerned with like what options you can pick. And I like also I do live in Portland, and previously I lived in Seattle, so like I am used to the dating experience in more liberal cities in general, but I have seen a lot of people on there of all different gender expressions and or gender identities, and that's something that I really like about it. Is I think it's like I feel like most dating apps these days, it's still like man, woman, and other, like unless you're paying for extra features, which just seems very silly to me. Um,
Yes.
but good question, Silly Putty. And if anyone has any thoughts they'd like to contribute, if they know of any resources, feel free to shout them out in the comments as well. Uh, my college girlfriend was Catholic. Further evidence of kink. Later correlation. True. We have Coco in Portugal. We have Louisiana. We have so many people from all over. Thank you for joining
Yay.
us.
Yes.
I
Yay.
believe I'm more on the dominant side. I hear people speaking about DS dynamics, and I find it a bit silly. I find it hard to imagine it real. Nobody could explain to be their process. Comments. I'm not sure what that last bit means. Um, I
Hmm.
think it maybe what they're trying to get to is like it's hard to imagine like what a day-to-day like DS relationship looks like, and like it is a little silly. And I will agree, I think it is a little silly. I think it is a little silly in the way that like if you're not really into like live action role playing, like LARPing probably seems kind of silly. Or like cosplaying in general probably seems kind of silly. We're not the one like putting in the work and the effort to do it. And I think this is honestly part of the reason why kink is very appealing to like geeky and nerdy people. I think it scratches in some ways the same part of the brain that that does, where you're geekily devoting yourself to this thing that's like fairly atypical that not a lot of people would do. And like, yeah, it is a little silly, but I think that's okay because it's not meant to be like the normal everyday thing. But Erin, I'm curious, like, how would you
Yes.
describe like the everyday or like realistic DS experience versus imagination?
Well, get ready. Here we go. So I
All
had
right,
a
let's
list
go.
of yes. So I actually a lot of my kink exploration personally has been around service. And
Mm.
so receiving service, I tend to be more dominant in kinky spaces and with partners. So yeah, my whole thing is, like what can be helpful sometimes is the five love languages. So I know
Mm.
that my love language is service, acts of service.
Mhm.
So yeah, I actually just had a move. I moved and moved back in because I was having my floors redone, and I have like clothing and books and everything. So I called somebody in my life who's very submissive and said, "Hey, I need you to put all my books on my bookshelf color coded, and arrange a certain level of things, So there was no like, again, there's no sexual play involved in this. This person likes to be of service to me for various reasons. And so the DS dynamic there was, here's how I'd like you to be of service. Here's the task I'm asking you to do as a dominant person to someone who's more submissive. And that was the interaction. So that was a practical thing I needed
Mm.
done. And this person, yeah, I was like, can you bring me a cappuccino and come arrange my books? to start and then take out my trash. And they were very excited to be helpful. I'm very grateful for people who have that experience and really want to participate with me in that way, in the DS dynamic of service. And so, yeah, that's one example. It's like we said, like we're saying, I mean, this is the constant idea that I want to make sure people really get, is that you can really create this however you want. It can be playful, it can be cosplay, it can be more dressed up, having a certain role or purpose, or it could be, hey, I need this thing done and you can do it. And can you do it for me? Because I think you're really good at this and you'll be rewarded if you do it. So there's so many ways the DS dynamic can play out.
Yeah. The way that I like to think about, like, the core of a DS relationship is that unless you're switching, so one person is a leader and one person is the follower. Doesn't have to be any more or less complicated than that. That's like the foundational aspect of it. And I think there's a layer of vulnerability inherent in that when you are letting someone be the leader. And also when you're being the leader, that requires vulnerability from your end as well, because you have to be like willing to be very honest, being very willing to like fully take responsibility for like mistakes or bad decisions, because
Yes.
you're the leader. That's kind of your job. The buck has to stop there because there's no one else, to pass it off to. Generally speaking, there are people who definitely will like blame their subs for everything when it isn't their fault, and that's like a different thing. But like, a good DS relationship, there is that level of vulnerability and trust. And I think when you look at it from that angle of this is something that's deeply bonding for that relationship because of how vulnerable it is, how honest you have to be, how authentic you have to be to show up in that every single day to have it really work. I think that like, even if you don't get it, I think that can kind of maybe help develop some empathy there over like, yeah, like for me, maybe the thing I'm into is like more vanilla, or maybe like more like sadomasochistic, but not DS related. But I can like respect and understand what it is that they're getting to. But yeah, it can seem very mundane sometimes just to have it be like, oh, pick up my trash or help me organize my schedule. But like, I think that's what's beautiful about it too, is it can be this really amazing, high protocol, planned out, black lingerie suit, whatever, high protocol dinner vibe, or it can be very everyday, wake up, who makes the coffee, who puts the lunches out before people leave to go to work. And it can very much integrate into everyday life in a way that is unobtrusive, which can also be advantageous for people that need to have that level of discretion.
Communication. And Evie, real fast, I love what you said about like the dominant person needs to be communicating well too, or know what they want. I mean, as someone who's been socialized my whole life as a woman in America, I really had to get into a place where I was okay asking for things. I mean, that's still a work in progress for me. And Kink has been deeply fulfilling in that way, actually, to really exercise the muscle of like saying what I want, asking for what I want. But all of this takes some practice. If I didn't grow up Catholic, but I did grow up like with mainstream ideas about gender and roles and a lot of things. So it's been a process to undo a lot of that, and Kink has been super helpful in that for me, for sure.
Oh, okay, the next two questions I'm like very excited to get to. So Ultraviolet asked, any suggestions on how can you maintain power exchange in an LDR, so a long distance relationship? Thanks for all your work. So Erin, what do you think about maintaining power exchange in a long distance relationship?
Well, it's interesting because we just went through a pandemic where a lot of things were long distance or virtual, etc. So, it can be tricky. I mean, I do feel like one of the keys is regular communication, checking in, whether it's texts, whether it's FaceTiming, whether it's, whatever you can do to stay in contact with each other, create little games for each other or little tasks. Oh, like again, if I'm I'll use myself as an example, since I like service. So maybe I would like you to go out and buy a beautiful bouquet of flowers and show it to me. Send me either a picture or a video. So it can be like little tasks you give somebody if you're service oriented, but just whatever your kink is or whatever you're exploring, like something that's interactive that you can do together. If it is sexual, maybe there's going to be something where you're like, okay, like buy this outfit for me, or hey, you just sent me this outfit, blah blah blah, let's show it off, or let's like dress up in our kinky outfits together at the same time and FaceTime and do something where it's interactive. And so you can maintain the power exchange that way by asking for somebody to do something for you, or doing something for the person asking, in terms of power exchange. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you brought up mail, and it's like I have really underutilized the power of the postal service in my
Same,
suggestions for long
same, same.
distance relationships. Like I'm like, ooh, you could like send someone a whole kit of here's a note at the top. Like you can make it really fancy, right? You'd be like, here's a bunch of stuff. Here's a list of instructions of things I want you to do with that stuff, and film yourself doing them and then send it to me. Like, you could do that if you're more like physically oriented. But now that we have all this technology for communication, especially like video calls, right? Like Zoom was not a thing, and then suddenly it was a huge thing. We have so many ways to like send voice notes, send videos. Like I think having little reminders throughout the day is like the best way to keep like mindful of your relationship, especially when you're not really having a frequent in-person contact of just like, hey, all right, so we're gonna have a built-in check-in, before you leave work, on your lunch break, when you get home, and like before bed. That's like not necessarily a huge time sink for people that are busy, but you have maybe like 5 to 10 minutes of like you reminding somebody their power exchange relationship, right? Like, good morning, master. And then like having maybe some kind of ritualistic phrase or something they do. Maybe they do a meditation in the morning where they're like meditating on a mantra about like their submission or service or something, just to kind of keep them in that headspace for a while before they go to work. And there's just so many options, so many options. So I think setting aside time when you can, just doing contact as you can throughout the day, not necessarily big things, but then just whatever you're comfortable with, video, texting, calls, just having
The
time
mail,
set aside for that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
mail some stuff. Love
Mail some
that.
stuff. Yeah. Video it, do video stuff. I think that's like where people really struggle is like, well, how do I do kink to myself? Which is kind of like for long distance relationships, if you're doing things that involve like bondage or impact play, you're gonna be doing things to yourself. But if there's a will, there's a way.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to bondage, there's tons of tutorials out there for doing like self-tying stuff. And then I love things like gags or hoods or things I think are also really nice tools. So you can wear them, have them on just around your apartment by yourself, but then be thinking of your partner while you're doing your dishes wearing a ball gag.
Yes, I like taking it a step further,
Mhm.
doing a ball gag and blindfold by yourself, and then having a person call you and say a bunch
Mm.
of things to you while you're. Oh my God! See, there you go.
Yeah, just
Instant
bouncing
scenario.
ideas. We got too many. We got too many. All right, let's move on to the next question here. My partner and I have been together for 10 plus years. We are both pretty compatible kink wise in the things we tried out, but she doesn't like the idea of having an actual talk about wants and needs. I think my first instinct there is to ask, okay, so she doesn't like the idea of having a talk about wants and needs, but like, why is that? Because there's one, the like cultural idea that like if you talk about it, it destroys it, like it makes it not hot anymore because you talked about it. Nervousness, not having practice at that level of honesty around some things that can be pretty, vulnerable, and things maybe you're not like you've never said out loud to anyone else before. Maybe she's nervous about what you'll think. She doesn't want judgment, or she doesn't like know how to explain herself even, maybe, right? She's like, I have this vague idea of this thing I want, but I don't know how to put it into words, so I don't know how to have a conversation about it. So I think first step number one is investigating, okay, we do want to have this talk, there's a roadblock here, what is the roadblock? And it could be all of those things, it could be a combination of some other things, but there's other reasons why people don't want to have talks. I feel like the especially for like longer term relationships, and if you were in a vanilla relationship and you're monogamous and kind of all of the usual typical things, you're not necessarily practiced at having like explicit conversations around like sexuality, because that's not typically the done thing, especially for like previous generations and older people. It's changing now in some ways, but it's still a work in progress. So maybe it's just she doesn't know how to have that conversation yet, but figure out what those things are, and then they can, hopefully be honest with you about what's going on. And even if they don't know, you can still go through a process of like, well, even if we don't know, let's just see what feelings are coming up, right? Is it anxiety, nervousness, fear. Like, there's ways to kind of drill down deeper if you need to, if you got to start at a deeper location. But yeah, Erin, I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, but that's what came to mind for me.
Yeah. I mean, this is interesting because I do feel like, as a sex educator and consent minded boundaries person, my
Mhm.
instinct is also to be like, oh, communicate as much as you can. But I want to say, if you've
Mm.
been together 10 years, you might have secret, like a way, your own language of communicating. So there
Mm.
could be some subtle ways, like if maybe you try flogging, for example, and okay, so your partner doesn't want to talk about before, so maybe you start gentle, and maybe your partner's noises, sounds of pleasure, sounds of discomfort, maybe they move their body a certain way if they don't like something. So there are ways you can do this
Mm.
if your partner is a hard no to having a conversation beforehand. Really, really be intentional though about watching and listening to your partner as you're trying things without a conversation before. But yes, I
Mm.
think the best case scenario is to have even if it's just a brief conversation about, okay, like let's check in about how hard you might want something, or maybe for me, I'll use myself as an example again. I know that I do not want anyone choking me. For sure not.
Mm.
That is a hard no for me. So even if it's, what are the extreme things that we know you don't want? Let's just give me a bullet point list, so at least there's some parameter, but again, other than that, if you know your partner's noises, how they move their body when they like something, you could go with that too without a
Yeah.
conversation.
I think there's also an aspect of, well, like, you can have a conversation without it being like a giant sit down thing. I think some people are very intimidated by the idea of, like, we're gonna sit down for multiple hours and we're gonna go through every single kink possible and talk about all of them in detail. For some people, that's really hot. For other people, it's really overwhelming. So maybe
Right.
it's more about, like, sort of casually, as it would naturally come up in conversation. Like, you're talking about something you did previously, or maybe an idea for this weekend or something. You can say, "Oh, hey, and I'm kind of curious, like, are there any things that you're, like, really not into that you wouldn't want to try?" And you can kind of just, like, build up an understanding through, like, piecing together, like, little bits of conversations as they happen. And we do talk a lot about the importance of negotiation and affirmative consent, and I'm a big believer in that. But especially with a longer term relationship already, when you
Right.
have a level of trust and knowledge of your partner, their general likes and dislikes, even if you are exploring a new area, you can choose to take on that risk of not having those big conversations and say, hey, we're gonna go along and just try things. And if
Mhm.
something's really bad, I expect for you to tell me, no, stop, whatever word you want to use for that. If you want to use a safe word or just do plain English, just say no or stop, like I was saying. Or you can have other tools for communication, right? You can, like, okay, tap me, squeeze me. It doesn't have to necessarily be a literal word, but have some way
Right.
to communicate that you're not liking this. I'll try to read your body language as best I can and try to get to a good place. I want you to tell me when you're really liking something, when you're not liking something. We can change things as we go and have more of that in moment communication rather than just like a lot of very front loaded communication. But then understanding that things can still happen, things can go wrong. You can think your partner's really enjoying something and then they can, like, mentally be like going on some other separate experience that you're not a part of that's like really negative for them. Like, oh, I thought you were having a really fun time. And it's like, well, actually, it triggered this memory for me. It's really unpleasant. And like, I was just trying to act happy. Like, there
Mm.
can be like conditioning and things you need to work through where people will feel like, well, I should act like I'm enjoying it because this is so important to you. And like, that's, you don't want to get into that territory. So there are definitely ways of dealing with it that are not just like, all right, slapping the contract down on the table and be like, all right, let's go through all this. You don't have to always do it that way.
For sure.
But
For the newbies, though,
Mhm.
please communicate as much as you can with new
Yes.
partners. Please, please, please. I mean, again, we're talking about a
Mhm.
specific scenario with established partners, so they do know each other a little bit better. So just wanted to say that to the newbies. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, when you have kink and vanilla interactions do have some overlap to them in terms of, like, yeah, if you've been intimately interacting with the same person for 10 years and like they still want to keep going and they're happy about it, like, chances are you probably understand like their communication style and their likes and their dislikes in a broad sense, at least.
Yes.
All righty, let's get to
Great
some more.
questions, everybody. Great
Yes,
questions.
awesome questions. Okay, so This person says, I want to go to a dungeon and munches and meet people, and I want to incorporate a girl with my hubby, but I have PTSD due to being cheated on heavily. How do I start feeling safe in those experiences?
Mm,
That is really a lot, but
wow.
Erin, any initial thoughts for you?
I mean, that's a big question. I mean, I appreciate that you still want to explore having
Mm,
a
mhm,
third and specifically, quote unquote, a girl in the mix.
mhm.
I would say definitely have some conversations with your husband around what could be a trigger for you. Like maybe there's
Mm,
a time limit set. If there is someone that you've found that you want to bring into the mix, maybe there's certain kinds of touch that person you don't want them to do to your husband specifically. You put some boundaries in place in terms of the interaction with this third person and your husband, or even the third person and you. If there's certain
mm.
that might feel too intimate, then and that could be a trigger, then those are the things to maybe stay away from. But definitely have a conversation with your husband first so he understands. So you're on the same page around what those things could be.
Hmm. Yeah, like I think there's the element of, okay, well, you want to make sure that your partner is not like doing something without your knowledge and that you feel safe doing that. I think probably a big part of it is going to be like obviously definitely going to events together, making sure you're doing everything together. I think something that's probably good to do as well is like talk and vet people beforehand. If
Hmm.
you can, like I again gonna keep saying it. I love Feel for this reason, especially if you're a
Yes.
couple. Like you can have a group conversation where it's the two of you together and the third person in a conversation together, so you know everything's being talked about together ahead of time, and hopefully through that you'd be able to be more comfortable because you know you're seeing all of their communication. But I'm assuming probably what you're looking for is more sexual in nature. If you want to incorporate another person, usually people are not talking. Usually, if people mean like co-bottoming or co-topping, they say that as opposed to like a sexual, like a threesome interaction or something.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I think it like just I think honor where your brain is at and trying to brute force yourself into a situation because you feel like you should be comfortable with it even when you're not is not likely to end up well. So I would
Yeah.
maybe start just like maybe like very easy like browsing profiles together, like talking about that,
Mhm.
not interacting with anybody, not even messaging anybody, but just looking at people, talking about it, then maybe getting into matching with people, then maybe getting into conversations, then maybe making plans to meet up with somebody in a neutral place, maybe going to an event together and looking at people in person and going, wow, that person looks hot. Wow, that person would be fun to play with. Don't literally point and say it out loud, please. But like, hushed tones. I mean, if it's at an exhibitionist event, maybe that would be welcome. But like in general, people don't like being pointed and be like, "Wow, that lady's so hot." Like, don't do that at your average dungeon night, please. But like, there's ways to build up and like, if something feels bad or it's going too far, slow down, go back to the previous step, work your comfort level up, and then if you get to a point where you're like, "I just don't think I can get really past this point," like that's okay. That's where you're at. Honor it. Don't make it so you feel like you have to do something.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so there you go. And then another question from Ultraviolet. Oh, actually, we have a super chat from Andrew who says, "Do you two have any tips or flags to look for on Field to see if accounts are legit? One woman like my
Mhm.
profile, and I can't explain what it is, but something just feels off." I think that's definitely a big problem, like especially with the advent of AI. I mean, even like regular social media, not even just dating apps, regular social media, it's very hard now to tell, like, is this her? Like, you have to really look in detail at the photos. Like, is this AI generated? Is this somebody who had professional headshots taken, or is this a Adobe stock photo? What's happening here? Um, so what I generally try to look for, I mean, it's kind of a vibe thing for me. I think I don't necessarily have like a concrete checklist of things I look for, but like um r- things I look for that to me are like, that's not really like a good sign for me is like somebody who like links to an outside social media profile. Like if somebody's like, here's my kick specifically. Like if it's kick specifically, I'm like, the because I am pretty sure, and I will have maybe our background helper confirm this for me. At least from what I can understand, like linking or like talking about outside like social media, like off messaging sites, like things like Kik or Snapchat, I don't think are kosher on Field in general. Anyone who talks about, you know, anyone who puts like their dominance first, like as though they're role playing in the profile, is like off putting to me. Like somebody who's like, I'm a goddess, and I'm looking for somebody to worship the ground I walk on. Like maybe if that's like towards the bottom of the profile, where it's like, you know, they're a real person first, but then here's a little bit about who they are as a kinky person. Anyone who leads and only talks about like, I'm this big domly dom and I'm gonna stomp you with my big boots, like that to me seems like somebody who's gonna ask you for money, probably pretty soon into a message. And yeah, anyone who just really emphasizes sex or kink in isolation as though they're not like a well-rounded individual who like is part of a community or has hobbies. That's going to be a red flag for me. But Erin, do you have any tips for navigating that?
Yeah, you said some really great things there, and I would just add, if I always like to encourage people to meet someone soon after matching. So match with a person on Field, you send a couple messages back and forth, and then even if it's just like a 30-minute coffee, like meet someone in
Mhm.
person. For me, it's helpful. I want to feel someone's energy. I want to see if they actually show up, because a lot of times people don't show up. I think a lot of us understand. A lot of people
Mhm.
ghost or are really excited and then whatever the reason, they cancel last minute. So it's, for me, it's like, are you going to show up? Do you look like your picture in person? Are you the same person? Um,
Mhm.
are you somebody that I energetically feel connected with?
Ooh,
I
oh my
actually
gosh,
like,
just totally fell off the
oh
Keep talking, Erin. I'll just myself.
no, keep talking. I'll keep talking. Like, are you someone who actually like wants to, that I want to interact with energetically based on like our energy? So for sure, like definitely meet with a person or make some schedule to meet them again. 30-minute, quick coffee, quick drink, something like that, to see if they're legit or see if they're who they say they are, if they look the same way, etc. I would also say, I think it's really important to like to what was I going to say here? It's really important to just like do your due diligence, ask certain questions. I agree with Evie. If someone's trying to get you to another platform, that's a huge red flag for me. I'm also somebody who personally, I like to set up the meeting for the coffee or the drink on the app. I don't like, it feels a little aggressive to me sometimes. And there's a range of school of thought with this. Giving your phone number out. I personally don't
Mhm.
my phone number out early on, because I've just had so many experiences where I give my phone number out to someone I haven't met in person yet, and then I'm getting random messages like at 3 a.m. or just I'm getting like messages that I didn't appreciate or consent to, or just like a bunch of text messages. So for me, it's like, okay, if we're gonna we matched, we're messaging back and forth a little bit. Let's meet up for coffee. You can do all of that in the app. You can do
Yeah.
all of that in the app. You meet in person. Then when you're like, oh my God, your energy is so great. And I straight up will just tell people, like when I meet them in person, thank you so much for not being aggressive about asking for my phone number. Like now that we see who each other are, like here's my number. So I do give it, but it's just, for me, it's just like, you gotta, like, everyone, regardless of gender, everyone needs to protect themselves and like make sure that they have some basic boundaries, and not boundaries, but like parameters for safety in place, So yes, I mean, it can be tricky. So, again, what's the bullet points? Message quickly, arrange a quick meeting after. Don't go to an outside app, like if they're
Mhm.
trying to, especially Kik, but I would even say WhatsApp or some of those too.
Yeah,
Sorry.
those two, yeah.
But yes. There you go. Yes.
Yeah, there's definitely lots of things to consider, and the phrasing on Field site says we strongly advise our community to use caution when sharing their personal information, phone numbers, social media handles, etc., their phones, their videos, as well as engaging in intimate video calls with other people. Staying safer means building trust with another before sharing personal details, and I definitely agree with all of that. I think there's just so many options these days on dating apps themselves. I don't really think you need to go off of the app while you're setting up the date. And I think
Yes.
even just like if you're trying to figure out if somebody's legit, even just like sending back and forth a couple of messages, you'll probably get more of a sense if they're a legitimate person or not. Like if they're
Yes.
like just saying like hi and then like a smiley face and that's it, and then like how you doing baby, like that's probably not somebody who's like either one authentically interested or two is a real person and not like a bot farm. But it's hard these days. It's
It is.
unfortunately getting difficult, but we also have tools to deal with it. So
Yes.
um, how does one even get into the lifestyle? I have been having to stash my kinks away for years. So it's a very, I like the way of phrasing it, but it also is sad at the same time. Have felt polyamorous, but the topic often themes like anathema with people in their 30s. At the ends of some of these topics, I'm like, what's the end of the sentence I'm trying to get at? But I mean, the short answer for how to get into the lifestyle uh is you're brave enough for like the 15 minutes it takes you to set up like a profile on like Field, another dating app, or like other just not even just actually not even say going to a website, but like just like to Google like dungeons in my area. Like
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
that's what it takes. Like for me, the pivotal moment of my life that was like I'm getting into the kink community is I ended a vanilla relationship that I kind of discovered kink during, and I really wanted to get more into it. And then during the breakup, I was just like, I don't have to get anyone's permission to do anything. I can go on these apps, I can try to meet people, I can go to parties, and I can do it myself. And at the time, I was still in college, so it was relatively easy to like meet people that were my age and go with them to events. And it just, it's being willing to take that leap off the diving board. Like the pool is there, you're on the end of, you're
Mhm.
kinky, you think you might be poly, like you've already crawled the ladder. Now you need to decide whether or not you're going to dive and go ahead and explore. If you're going to go, I actually don't really want to dive, I'm comfortable where I'm at, I'm going to climb down the ladder and not dive off. Or maybe you dive and you swim around the pool for a while, or maybe you get out immediately. You're like, nope, not for me. It depends. But polyamory is currently the topic du jour. It feels like, especially with like think pieces and op-eds and stuff. But it's getting to be more popular. But it's certainly, I think we're at that threshold of like 1 to 2% of people participating in it, where now it feels like everyone's doing it out of nowhere.
Yes.
But yeah, it's that's
True.
really what it takes. Honestly, it's just being a little bit brave. But Erin, what do you
Yeah.
think?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, you said so many great things. I mean, really just being social. Like it can be super intimidating. I do a lot of speaking and workshops and again for newbies and I see the nervousness all the time, every class I do. And then, once you can actually talk to another person about what it is or what they're doing, it takes all the it takes a lot of the nervousness away because it's just you're talking
Mm,
to other people who are just other humans, right? And they're talking about the things they're into and the variety of things they're into in terms of because I feel like it's kinky stuff, but it's also non-monogamy, polyamory stuff, and a lot of times that does overlap, which is a topic for another conversation. But yeah, I mean, it's really important to just be social. Community is so important in all of this.
mm.
So wherever you can find other people to talk to and just brainstorm and just see where they're going or what they're into, the more comfortable the more normalized it's gonna feel.
Yeah.
Again, I speak to this, a lot of people that I know in kink specifically or non-monogamy didn't grow up around it. It's been a process for us all to get comfortable in self and like not feel shame around all these things. There's so much shame around all these things. And like Evie said, I mean, a lot of this stuff is becoming more mainstream. Op-ed articles, pieces, and all these things about it, which is great, but you going into a space or you breaking through the shame of the thing you're into, it can be super intimidating. So community, be social, meet more people, and it's just going to feel like, oh yeah, I'm going to that dungeon on Friday.
Yeah. Before you know it, it'll feel like a mundane activity. So
Yes.
there was somebody who very briefly says, this isn't a question, but maybe just sort of a note I wanted to highlight is somebody asked, or rather said, I'd love to watch a negotiation live. And that maybe like, could be a fun idea for a future one of these is we could like
Yeah.
set up some like mock negotiations and then maybe have as like a pre-recorded video of like mock negotiations and then have like the next like 40 minutes or 45 minutes of it just be like breaking down negotiations and focusing on that. But we will definitely recognize that and maybe think about that for the future. um Let me see here. So this is a follow-up from a previous thing that we answered. I think it's definitely a combination of not wanting to say what she wants out loud and feeling shy about it. I just don't want to be pushy or insensitive about it. Thank you, responses. What also might be helpful if she's nervous about saying things out loud, and this is something I had to do, especially early on in my kink journey before I was like really able to own it, is writing things down. That could be on a
Yes.
whiteboard during a conversation. It could be keeping like maybe a Google Doc or something that she has just to herself, but some way for her to write it down. I find people tend to be more comfortable with that if
Mhm.
words aren't something that feels very accessible to them.
Yeah, it's
So,
great.
yeah, that's definitely just a side note for that specifically. Oh, good question from Crying Raven. My partner is really into CNC, which is consensual non consent, and he really wants us to experiment together. I'm on the fence about it, and I'd still like to dip my toes in it so I can decide if it's for me or not. Any advice? And I think my instinct again is to ask, what do you mean by CNC? Because I
Yeah.
find people have very different definitions of what counts as CNC, especially these days. I think it's become, maybe actually because of social media censorship, it's become the go-to term for what we previously used to call ravishment play or like for sex fantasies. And CNC is much bigger than that. But if what your partner really means is like a kidnapping forced sex scenario, and what
Mhm.
you're thinking is like, I want them to make me eat a jar of baby food. Like, you know, there's quite a disparity there. So make sure you're on the same page about what the definition of CNC is that you're working with and like what the kinds of things he would want to experiment with would be, so you know enough to be able to decide if you want to keep exploring with it. But you can definitely like dip your toes into CNC. It's a little bit hard because like you either are doing CNC, you aren't, but you can titrate it to make it more or less intense. Like, right, like the baby food example. For some people, that's going to be like beyond the pale and disgusting. But for other people, they're gonna be like, I mean, applesauce is basically just baby food. So what's the difference? But CNC to me, if we're going off of very general terminology, just any form of like consenting to not have your, consent be obtained specifically at like a future point.
Mhm.
Whether or not that means no safe words, whether or not that means like other things is very individual, but it's hard to know down an exact definition of it for because it's so broad, but also very
Yeah.
narrow at the same time. I generally think about it like, okay, well, you could do non-consent like role play, and that's maybe a better way to dip your toe into it, where you're playing as though you are not consenting, but really you are consenting, which is like one flavor of CNC that's different from like not having safe words, not having an explicit negotiation ahead of time, etc. Like you're still negotiating everything. Maybe you're saying, no, stop, please don't, and they keep going, but you both agree and understand that no and stop don't actually really mean no and stop for that moment. But Erin, any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I would say read as much as you can about it. Take as many workshops as you can about it. Like Evie
Mm-hmm.
said, there's so many things under the umbrella. I feel like the thing that could help too is it's essentially consensual non-consent plays on the idea of surprise. So think about ways that you can surprise each other, or just like, and again, I love the idea of writing it down. Like make a list of ways you could surprise each other. So then there's maybe you have a working list of things that you're talking with your partner about, of ways you could surprise each other in this way. And so there can, and even with like if there say is a kidnapping fantasy, there are like levels to that. It doesn't have to be the extreme end of like we rent a car that you don't know and then we do. It could be as simple as you being in your house and the person coming in from another room and doing something to surprise you in a way around a kidnap type thing. So I mean, so there's, again, just remember that there's degrees and levels to all of this. It doesn't have to be the most extreme version of whatever consensual non-consent thing you want to do or interested in. So go slow, write down a list, take it easy, and have fun. Yes.
Yeah. All right. I think we have maybe time for one or two more questions. So I'm going to skip a little bit ahead in the line because I think this one's a good one to highlight that we haven't gotten to yet. But Arnica says, I love the freedom of feeling that you can ask for your needs to be met. Kink feels like an amazing space to explore this, but how do you even start to build the confidence to even get there? And Erin, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, so I love this question. I touched on this earlier. Being,
Mhm.
someone socialized, raised as a cis woman in America, cis Black woman in America. Lots of stereotypes, lots of boxes that I feel like I grew up in, and so kink has been a really
Mm.
amazing way to explore outside of those boxes that I was born into in a lot of
Mhm.
ways. So yeah, I mean, the confidence. I'm still, I'm even as a sexuality professional, there are moments where I don't feel confident. And so I just want to normalize that.
Mm.
We're all human beings. We all have experiences and we all have moments where we don't feel super sure of ourselves.
Sure.
So, if there's certain things that you might be interested in, um, again, community is huge in this. When I started finding other dominant women in kink spaces, I was like, oh my God, it's not just me that's interested in this. And then again, back to the skill sharing and just sharing of ideas and like kind of cheering, like high-fiving each other of yes, yes, dominant woman, all that kind of stuff is super helpful. And it gave me a lot more confidence. Also, last thing, finding people who wanted to be submissive and liked my dominant personality or persona. That was a huge confident boost.
Mm.
I met those people at social events. So through dating apps, Field is a great one. Field is amazing for this, finding people who are whatever you're looking for, finding the people that validate who you are and who you want to be in kink is a great way to build your confidence. And again, finding people who are like-minded that you can be like, oh, me too, you too, me too, you too. Like
Yeah.
that's the best way for sure.
Yes. Yeah, I think a field is like if you're a female dominant who's looking for, I mean, submissives of any variety, but male submissives in particular, I think are the most open on field out of any of the dating apps I've been on. Like I can kind of like infer a little bit sometimes from other dating app pictures of like, are they trying to communicate that they want to be made to wear women's underwear? Like,
Right.
like you have to kind of read between the lines a little bit, but I feel they can be very explicit. I think definitely having partners that support you in your role and like genuinely enjoy what you're doing, like that's going to be a huge confidence builder. But maybe one more question about femdom to wrap things up today. How does one become more femdom? I have always been submissive and I love it, but I have no experience being dominant and I want to be. So, Erin, it's kind of a related question here as far as confidence goes, but what are your thoughts?
I mean, honestly, again, for me, the easiest way for me to get into it was two things. Um, having people who are service oriented. I'm a very busy
Mm,
person, so I always need things done. Like, I really should probably have an assistant, but because I'm kinky, it's manifested into service oriented submissives. So, that for me was an easy way to get into kink, like personally. It's like, well, I need these things done, and I'm finding people who want to be helpful, which means a lot to me. The second thing in terms of building confidence for me has been clothing. So like for me,
yeah.
kink is I'm a theater nerd. I grew up in theater as a kid, like, performance and TV and all these things, right? Okay, so it's kinky theater. Like for me,
Mm.
kink is theater. It's a fun role play scenario with people. So dressing up, latex, leather, fishnets, or maybe I'm all buttoned up like a boss, with like
Mhm.
whatever it is, like that clothing for me is a huge confidence boost. Especially if I'm going to events or even if I'm meeting someone after I've matched with them on field, for example, like me showing up in a certain outfit to meet somebody kinky wise, it's like I'm walking into this coffee shop and I know why we're meeting and I know what I'm feeling and here we go. So yes, definitely clothing for sure. That should be number one, actually, clothing.
Yeah, clothing is like really big, and I think honestly that's something that I think male doms really underestimate the power of. Like they show up in cargo shorts and a graphic T-shirt, and they're like, "I don't know why I don't feel dominant." And it's like,
Oh,
well, it's like I need you dress the part. I mean, sometimes that for the role play scenario that might make sense, but like having outfits or even like specific colors that you wear, a specific way of doing your makeup or your hair that to you feels dominant and embodies that energy can be a huge thing. I will also say being in spaces with other dominant women is also very good, especially if you're in the community. You're probably, if you're living in most areas in the US especially, you're probably mostly used to seeing like male dominance and male tops take up the majority of the space. And so even if there are one or two femdoms, it kind of feels like an outlier. Whereas if
yeah.
you're in a femdom led space, that's like the energy is just different. Like when I've been in femdom spaces, like I think it's a lot more easy to find a little part of yourself that's like, yeah, I can be like that too, and then like kind of let it out because it feels like a safer place to explore. Whereas, unfortunately, especially because a lot of male doms try to help female dominance because clearly they couldn't know as much as them, and they need to have this big strong man come up and show them how to be dominant. Like, you get people who don't understand boundaries super well, but femdom spaces I think are really safe. Or going to an event where you explicitly are there to be dominant. So like a protocol party, for example, where it's
Yes.
a female dominant like protocol party. You are there to be one of the dominant women. So when you show up, the role is picked for you. You're the one who's sitting at the table eating the dinner and not serving it. So you kind of have to be in that role because you can't like escape back into your submission in that moment. You have to kind of stay in the rails of that experience, and I think that makes it maybe makes it sound more extreme than what I mean. But like the helpful part of that is like sometimes I find people they go into an event space intending to be dominant, and if they're around certain people in a familiar environment, they revert back to being submissive because it's more comfortable and it's like their routine and their habit to be in that space. Whereas when you're like forced to be in the dominant role because of the type of activity you're doing and it's new, like you're more likely to stay there and like understand what that feels like for you. And then also you get to network with people who are femdoms and be like, oh, hey, I'm a female person and I'm dominant, and so are you. And like, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it while we're eating this dinner. And somebody's my footstool. Like, it's just how it
Yes.
goes. So
Love it,
yeah,
love it, love it.
yeah, I think that's about all the time we have for questions, you all. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for being here again, Erin, and thank you for Field for coordinating this. If you would like to find more resources or download Field or find us on social media, it'll be linked down in the description box. And hopefully, we will see you all very soon. Bye.
Bye.